Recently, petrol taxes have been one issue which has been debated upon, but there's been a lot of discussion off late about the quote unquote freebie culture also. Political parties promising a whole lot of sops to voters, so that they win elections. Now, Tamil Nadu is a state which has had this political culture for a very long time, and there have been critiques of it, and we are now also seeing research which says that the Dravidian model has actually helped a lot of human development, etc. But Tamil Nadu also, like you said, has a real debt sustainability problem. It has got a fiscal problem. What is your take on this debate?
Look, I think there are three different questions there. I think the term freebies is kind of again a lazy terminology, right? Everybody gives something for free,
Yes, sir.
right? I mean, the question is in what context and how much related to elections and so forth. So, from that perspective, I would say I've had this discussion many times before, so I don't want to bore you or bore myself. But there are many types of so called free of cost services, right? There are some that are essential: free food to children, free laptops to college goers, free. I mean, these are meaning government school students. We're not giving to all students, we're only giving to government school poor, relatively poor, economically backward. Free cycles for girls to go and attend high school. These kinds of things, they are revenue expenses in the accounting treatment of the state. But they're really, in my opinion, capital investments. If you bought it for your house, you'd account the laptop as a capital investment, right? Or putting food into kids and making their nourishment go up, nutrition go up, is a capital investment in human resources, right? So there are good freebies, what are called otherwise called freebies. There are good investments. There are some that I have justified as kind of insurance type, right? Health insurance, money for weddings and thalis, which is a way of trying to reduce the risk of debt. There is, what can I say, other kinds of subsidies and so forth in that space. And then there are what I would consider, illogical or irrational freebies, like what is it, two wheelers, 25,000 rupee to subsidy to buy two wheelers and so forth for 1 lakh people a year when you have a population of 7.5 to 8 crore. It's bad in every way. So it's a too broad a term. Now I'll go to two separate levels. Do we have unsustainable debt? Well, really not that bad. It was a really, what was bad was that it went from 17% of GSDP to 27% of GSDP in 10 years or so. And that was bad. What was bad, more worse than that, was that it made the interest burden go from 11% of revenue to 21% of revenue. Therefore, it put us into a kind of unsustainable short-term and longer-term problem. We have already started to correct that this year. If you see the medium-term fiscal plan we put out as part of the FRA, our state's equivalent of the FRBM, we put that out as part of the budget. And I've been conservative. I'm saying that in 2 years, we'll come down to almost zero revenue deficit and under 3% fiscal deficit. That's what the FRA Act requires. In fact, I'm fairly confident that barring some, extraneous events of great shock, we'll beat that, just like we beat this year's estimates, and we'll beat every year's estimate because we're conservative in estimating and we're very good at executing. And we get better all the time. Second year, third year, we learn our job. So it's not unsustainable. It was the decay in such a rapid time from being an exemplary state to being a basket case state was what really bothered us. But, I've been very fortunate that when I came and saw the inside workings of the government, I realized how things had rotted. And with the full support of my chief minister and his blessings, we are on track to bring it back. So what the 7 years of decay, I'm saying I'll correct it in 3 years. By the time we present the 24-25 budget, we'll be back where we need to be. And after that, it's sustainable. It will still not be down to 17% and 11%, but it will be both going downwards, and maybe another 2-3 years from that, we'll be back there where we need to be. The third component is there a correlation between the freebies or these kind of handouts and the unsustainability at the short term or the depth of decay in the short term? The answer is that's not clear. In fact, their spending was much less also, because you see what these guys did. The biggest problem was the loss of revenue, because there was so much corruption on the way in commercial taxes, in mining, in almost every department, in alcohol, in TASMAC, and everything, that the revenues dropped from 10%, 9.5%, 10% of GSDP, states owned, independent of the union's grant, or share of taxes come back. It dropped from 9.5, 10% to 7% before the pandemic, and 5.86% during the pandemic. That was the problem. So they compensated for that partly by extra borrowing, partly by cutting back spending. So in fact, they were not able to do profligate spending because they didn't have enough money. Because they did a bit of it here and there around the elections and stuff. But if you look at the overall spending of the government, it came down dramatically as a percentage of GSDP because they couldn't fill the whole loss of revenue by borrowing. They couldn't borrow additional 3% of GSDP. What used to be a revenue neutral state, if you suddenly go down to a revenue drop of 3%, you can only increase your revenue deficit by 1.5%, 2% of GSDP, and that means you kill investment, that means you kill future growth. All those are longer term consequences. In the shorter term, that means you're still spending 1 or 1.5% less of GSDP compared to a good government in revenue expenses. So, in fact, there's not a clear correlation that the freebies led to the problem. There were some other really mismanaged and badly run things that led to the problem.
So I have a related question. Are you surprised, or do you think then, because DMK has practiced and you talked about welfare politics, are you surprised, and do you think it's smart politics what the BJP is doing now in the success of their in the recent state elections was attributed to having this whole beneficiaries to all the welfare politics that they did, along with the Hindu vote, targeting the Hindu vote. So, do you think that they are now able to practice which is something that DMK and others have done for a long time?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say. I must confess that for somebody like me, relatively, technical and scientific in my approach, relatively data-driven, relatively, deep analyst by nature, it's hard for me to see how BJP governments keep getting re-elected, both at the Union in 19 and in other parts in the Hindi belt. And some part of me wonders whether it is the lack of education, the lack of kind of opportunity, and therefore the lack of hope. And in fact, I won't name the person, but a very senior person in Delhi that I had a chance to meet effectively told me the same thing that I had been thinking. I said, is it that the difference is in the southern states and in the coastal states, we are still talking about hope, about the pie growing and trying to promise people different portions of the pie, whereas in the hinterland, it's everybody's taken for granted the pie is not going to grow. At best, you're going to get greater devolution from the rich states. So really, it's about it's a zero-sum game, fighting for who gets what share of the pie, and therefore othering and kind of rabble-rousing and jingoism plays a big role. That's one theory. The other theory, of course, which worries me a bit, is that I don't know. I'm so far away, right? I only know my politics. It's entirely possible that when I look at it from outside, we are all limited and shaped by our views, our experiences, our data. It's entirely possible that the people of those states somehow feel or have been convinced that the opposition would be even worse off. And so they're choosing between, the less bad of two bad choices. I can't tell. I just don't have enough data and I don't have enough analysis. And so I don't know what goes into what. But let me go another way. The primary reason to do this kind of subsidy and this kind of schemes, in my opinion, ought not to be whether or not you can win the next election or two elections on it. The primary reason to do it should be that if you are a, Dravidian, for us, and it could be equal to anybody, but let's say, instead of Dravidian, let's say, inclusive growth, compassionate government, then your job is to protect the bottom of the pyramid, right? And let me put it another way. What is the job of a government from an economic perspective? It's not that complicated. Only 3 or 4 real major functions. One, to raise revenues justly, fairly, more from those who can pay, less from those who cannot, and use it to provide a good quality of life, high quality public goods and services to everybody. In effect, you're neutralizing or kind of elevating the average lifestyle of society at the expense of the rich relative to the poor. Number two, to provide a safety net for those who need it, and that will not be permanently anybody. In a good society, there should be social mobility, and from time to time, everybody may need unemployment insurance or health treatment or whatever. So you provide a safety net for those who need it, and show you're a caring and compassionate society. Number three, you create an environment for growth. You create a good law and order situation, good infrastructure investment, good kind of labor force, so that you create the environment for investment and capital to come and create opportunities and go forward, right? Broadly, those are the kind of three things. And then, of course, the philosophy of kind of, what is the right role for the private sector, what's the right role for the public sector, what's the right role for the cooperation movement or joint ventures, and this kind of. This is broadly the role of the government. In the course of that, if you are required to provide something, what you may call freebie, what I may call equalizing payments or social mobility investment or human factor development investment, then it's okay because you're doing it as part of some philosophy. You're not just doing it because this election or next election. I'm not saying all parties are great. I'm not saying any party is 100% clear. I'm not saying all my manifestos are pure. Of course, some of this happens everywhere. But I think the core values are the most important thing. You do things based on your core values. I'll give you one example as a case study. My leader has announced in his 10-year plan, he first announced, Ruchi, that we would like to provide every woman who runs a house 1,000 rupees a month. Right? Now you can look at it in multiple ways. You look at it as every ration card, and there's 2 crore something ration cards. Then you say 2 crore something ration cards times 12,000 rupees a year is 24,000, 25,000 crores. That's a big bill. That might be higher than all but 2 or 3 departments worth of spending in the Tamil Nadu government. But then you look at it the other way and say, really is the intent to provide 1,000 rupees to every single person? Because Tamil Nadu is, I think, in my understanding, the only state that has a universal PDS. Whoever asks for one gets a card. They don't have to come and buy anything. There are like 7 or 8 grades of cards. Some people almost get no benefit. But the number of cards roughly matches the number of families. Then you say, should you really give all the families 1,000 rupees? Well, here are the macro statistics. The per capita income of Tamil Nadu is over 3 lakh rupees. Right? And whatever we do of like survey statistics, we found 75% of people own their own houses. 90% of households have phones. 60% plus own two-wheelers. There are 2.6 crore registered two-wheelers in Tamil Nadu, only 2.1 something crore cards, ration cards. More than 50% of households have refrigerators. Are these the people who really need 1,000 rupees a month? So my personal view on this would be that we should have some measure of trying to find out who will really benefit, whose life improves. How do we get social justice uplift, which we say is our core value, by doing these kinds of payments, and do those payments as opposed to universal payments. Certainly my family or my relatives don't need the money, right? We are not of the need of government support.